Hi, my name is Cameron Robichaux, and I chose to do the first question on our discussion board, which is how well does our attitude predict our behavior? For reading the chapter, it was very interesting because it gave me a lot to think about, and I hadn't really thought about, in everyday life on how, like, sometimes the attitude, like, you think, oh, initially I thought if you're angry, well, your behavior is going to be angry, or if you're sad, the behavior is going to be sad. And sometimes that does not correspond, especially when it comes to broader things like, are you pro choice, pro life, or even like housing arrangement? Like, would you vote on to give housing to people who can't afford it? Or would you have them, pay like the stipend and stuff like that? And I think the biggest thing it comes down to our attitude and our behavior are widely affected by like our influences in our life from when we're younger, until you die, because in my opinion, when you get older versus when you're younger, anyone can change. But that was like the biggest thing, and also that the influences, it depends on if they're big or if they're small. But if they're smaller, then that behavior is probably going to be different. Or if the influence itself is like, if the attitude is just really strong with that influence, then it could lead to that. Or if the attitude and behaviors match, like within the voting chart that we read about in the chapter, then that corresponds a little bit better than usual. But also, the biggest thing that researchers have found that kind of affected too is like that explicit and implicit bias, where the implicit version would be like, oh, like in the chapter, they said they didn't feel like they were prejudiced, one of the volunteers, but with their answers, with the implicit bias test, it showed that they were actually prejudiced because these aren't things we're very, explicit about. It's more implicit, so what's inside, what do we actually think, but we don't see it. Versus something like the president, as of late, and even mentioned in our chapter, that tends to be more explicit, and people tend to follow through more with saying things like that than when it comes to like the prejudice and like the racial, issues that we have in our society today. But I have to even say, even from my experience, like, I will do that too, where it's kind of a thing where, like, oh, I'm upset, but then I go to work and my behavior is actually completely the opposite because, I'm at work and I'm like, everybody else is okay. And I'm like, I need to, be in that mindset because you can't be, I guess, upset or angry in a certain place. And because of where I'm at, I'm being influenced to be, okay, because people are greeting me. These people aren't, they didn't do anything like mean to me or anything like that, so I have no reason to act out towards them. But that would be a perfect example, as like my attitude was like, oh, I'm very mad, I really could be home, but the behaviors that I exhibited at work was like, let me do this for you, let me do that. And so my coworkers would probably say, you seem fine. I had no idea anything was wrong. So also, I want to have one last thing before I end the video, is that our direct experiences also can influence like behaviors and attitudes. And I think the perfect one was like the housing agreement that I keep mentioning about, the college students, where like everybody's like, yeah, they deserve housing, they deserve better housing, this and that. But when it really came to voting and actually signing petitions and doing things for it, the only ones that really went through for it was people that actually were affected by it, or have been around it, or have been influenced in some way, and not the people who just didn't have any experience with it. They didn't do anything towards it. And so our experiences definitely can affect our behavior. So the attitude is like, yeah, I'm very like open and relatable, and like I would vote for all this and that. But when it comes down to it, without those experiences, sometimes we don't really enact those behaviors when we're all alone, because it's not something that we tend to think about what others go through, or just other situations, and we don't apply it to ourselves. And this is the end of my discussion, and I want to thank you for listening, and